My name is Elena, and I am 52 years old. My life, by most standards, is quiet and predictable. I wake up early, make my morning tea, and spend my days working as a freelance editor from the comfort of my modest home. It's a solitary existence, not unpleasant but often lonely, and I had long ago resigned myself to the notion that my days of feeling truly alive, of feeling desired, were far behind me. That is, until last Tuesday. It was a chilly, overcast morning, and I decided to step out for a walk to clear my head. I ended up at a small café I frequent, a cozy little place with worn wooden tables and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee hanging in the air. I ordered my usual, a cappuccino with just a sprinkle of cinnamon, and settled by the window with a book I wasn't really planning to read. That's when I saw him. He walked in with an effortless kind of confidence, his dark hair slightly disheveled, his coat slung casually over one shoulder. He couldn't have been older than 27 or 28, but there was something about him, an air of quiet charm, a warmth in his smile as he greeted the barista. I couldn't look away. I should have felt embarrassed, a woman my age staring so openly, but I didn't. There was something magnetic about him, something that stirred a part of me I thought had long since faded. My heart raced, and for a brief moment, I felt like a schoolgirl again, caught in the throes of an impossible crush. He sat at a table not far from mine, his attention focused on a notebook he pulled from his bag. I watched him discreetly, pretending to sip my coffee, while stealing glances. He was scribbling something, occasionally pausing to run a hand through his hair or tap his pen against the table. I don't know what came over me, but when he stood up to leave, I found myself following him. Not in an obvious way. I kept my distance, blending into the crowd as he walked down the street. My curiosity overpowered my better judgment. I just wanted to know more about him, to understand why this stranger had sparked something in me that I hadn't felt in years. Over the next 3 days, I found myself retracing his steps. I saw him visit the bookstore on Main Street, where he lingered in the poetry section. I watched him sit by the fountain in the park, tossing breadcrumbs to the pigeons. I even saw him smile at a street musician, tossing a few coins into their hat before moving on. With each moment, I learned something new about him, his kindness, his quiet nature, the way he seemed to savor life in a way I hadn't in so long. And as much as I tried to rationalize my actions, to tell myself that this was foolish, I couldn't stop. Because for the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. By the third day, I had begun to recognize his habits, his rhythm. He seemed to favor early mornings at the park, often sitting on the same bench near the pond. He'd bring a book with him, sometimes poetry, sometimes something heavier, judging by the titles I glimpsed from afar. His expressions shifted with every page, a faint smile, a furrowed brow, a look of wonder. It was mesmerizing. I had convinced myself that he hadn't noticed me. I was careful, after all, keeping my distance, blending into the background. But on that third morning, something changed. I was standing near the fountain, pretending to admire the ducks gliding across the water, when I felt it, a glance, soft but deliberate. I turned my head slightly and caught his gaze. His dark eyes lingered for a moment before he looked away, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. My heart skipped. Had he noticed me before? Was this just coincidence? I tried to shake it off, to tell myself it was nothing. But as I walked past him later, my footsteps slow and uncertain, I felt his eyes on me again. This time, I didn't look back. My cheeks burned, and I could barely keep my hands steady as I adjusted the scarf around my neck. The rest of the day was a blur. I couldn't stop replaying those moments in my head, analyzing every glance, every smile. Was I imagining it? Or was there something there, some unspoken recognition? The next morning, I returned to the café, hoping to see him again. I told myself it was just for closure, to prove to myself that he wasn't really aware of me, that I was just another face in the crowd. But when he walked in and saw me, there was no mistaking it this time. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, the bustling noise of the café seemed to fade into silence. He didn't look away. Instead, he smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made my chest tighten. I managed a small nod in return, though I could feel my pulse quicken, my palms growing damp against the ceramic cup in my hands. As he ordered his coffee, I kept my gaze fixed on the table, trying to steady my breath. But when he walked past me to find a seat, he paused, just for a moment, and turned his head slightly in my direction. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft but rich, like the first notes of a song you never want to end. I froze, my mind scrambling for a response. "Good morning," I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. And then he was gone, settling into a corner table with his coffee and notebook. But something had shifted. I could feel it in the air, in the way his presence seemed to linger even after he looked away. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe that this wasn't all in my head. That maybe, just maybe, he had noticed me, too. The days that followed felt like a dream, one I was hesitant to wake from. Each time I saw him, whether at the café, the park, or even in passing, it felt as though an invisible thread was pulling us closer together. His glances became more frequent, his smiles more assured. And with every fleeting moment of connection, my resolve grew stronger. I couldn't keep hiding behind stolen glances and quiet fantasies. If I wanted to know where this could lead, I had to take the next step. The thought terrified me, but it also stirred something electric within me, a daring I hadn't felt in years. It was a crisp Friday evening when I finally mustered the courage. I saw him at the park, sitting on his usual bench, the faint glow of the setting sun casting a golden hue around him. He looked so at ease, so content, as though the world couldn't touch him. And yet I was about to try. As I approached, my hands trembled slightly, and I clutched the strap of my bag to steady myself. He noticed me almost immediately, his dark eyes lifting from his book to meet mine. "Hi," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "Hi," he replied, his smile both familiar and reassuring. I hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words, before blurting out, "Would you like to join me for dinner?" "At my place." The question hung in the air, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. For a moment, he simply looked at me, his expression unreadable, and I braced myself for rejection. But then his lips curved into a gentle smile, and he closed his book, setting it aside. "I'd love to," he said. The walk to my home was a blur of nervous chatter and quiet laughter. I told him about my work, my love for cooking, and how I'd been rediscovering small joys like walking through the park and trying new recipes. He listened intently, occasionally sharing snippets about himself, a love for poetry, a fascination with history, and an unexpected fondness for homemade meals. When we arrived at my door, I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the key. "It's nothing fancy," I said, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm not here for fancy," he replied, his voice calm and steady. Inside, I busied myself in the kitchen, preparing a simple pasta dish while he wandered the living room, examining the bookshelves and photographs that painted a picture of my life. "Your home feels warm," he said, his tone thoughtful. "Thank you," I replied, glancing over my shoulder to catch him smiling at a framed photo of me in my 20s. Dinner was a mix of easy conversation and moments of comfortable silence. But beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension, a charge in the air that neither of us acknowledged but both of us felt. When the plates were cleared and the evening stretched on, I found myself sitting beside him on the couch, closer than I'd planned. My heart raced as his hand brushed against mine, lingering for a moment before intertwining his fingers with mine. I looked at him, my breath catching in my throat. And for the first time in years, I let myself lean into the moment, into him, and into the unknown that awaited us both. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the heater and the faint rustle of the curtains as the evening breeze seeped through the cracks in the window. My heart raced as we sat there, his hand still entwined with mine. I could feel the warmth of his palm, steady and reassuring, grounding me in a moment that felt both surreal and inevitable. He turned toward me, his dark eyes searching mine as though he was trying to decipher something unspoken. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but for the first time in a long while, I didn't want to hide. "Elena," he said softly, my name on his lips sending a shiver down my spine. Yes. My voice trembled, betraying the nervous excitement coursing through me. Can I tell you something? He asked, his gaze never wavering. I nodded, unable to find the words. I've noticed you, he said, his voice low but steady. For days now. At the café, the park, even when you thought I wasn't looking. My breath caught. I opened my mouth to respond, to explain, but he raised a hand, silencing me gently. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but there's something about you, something I can't ignore. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and I felt the walls I had built around myself begin to crumble. I reached out, placing a hand on his cheek, my fingers trembling as they brushed against a stubble. I feel it too, I whispered, the truth spilling out before I could second-guess myself. He leaned in, his movements slow and deliberate, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I didn't. I closed the distance, our lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and electrifying. It wasn't hurried or frenzied. It was deliberate, filled with a depth of emotion that words could never capture. Time seemed to blur as the kiss deepened, his hands finding their way to my waist, pulling me closer. I could feel his heartbeat against mine, the rhythm matching the wild cadence of my own. We moved together, guided by instinct and an unspoken understanding, the barriers of age and expectation dissolving in the heat of the moment. Every touch, every caress was a rediscovery, a reminder that I was still alive, still capable of passion and connection. When we finally broke apart, our breaths mingling in the quiet space between us, I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming intensity of it all, the realization that I had taken a chance, that I had let myself feel again, and that he had met me there with open arms. You're incredible, he murmured, his fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. I laughed softly, a mix of disbelief and joy. I didn't think this would ever happen to me again. Why not? He asked, his tone genuine. Because people like me don't get second chances, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. You deserve every chance, Elena. And I want to be part of whatever comes next. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just rediscovering love. I was rediscovering myself. The woman I thought I had lost was still there, waiting for me to reach out and reclaim her. And with him by my side, I felt ready to do just that. The morning light filtered through the curtains, painting the room in soft hues of gold. I woke slowly, still cocooned in the warmth of the previous night's memories. For a brief moment, I forgot where I was, the events of the evening feeling almost like a dream. But then I turned my head and saw him, still asleep beside me. His face was relaxed, the lines of concentration I had noticed so often in the park and café now smoothed away. His breathing was slow and even, his chest rising and falling beneath the blanket we shared. A wave of tenderness washed over me, and I resisted the urge to reach out and touch his face, afraid to disturb the peace of the moment. Instead, I slipped out of bed quietly, wrapping myself in a robe before heading to the kitchen. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, excitement, disbelief, and a touch of nervousness. What did this mean for us? What would happen next? I busied myself with making coffee, the simple routine grounding me as I tried to process everything. The rich aroma filled the air, and I found myself smiling, the weight of my thoughts easing with every sip. You're up early. His voice came from the doorway, warm and slightly husky from sleep. I turned to see him standing there, the morning light catching in his tousled hair. He was wearing the shirt he'd hastily pulled on, and the sight of him in my home, so effortlessly comfortable, made my heart swell. I didn't want to wake you, I said, setting down my cup. Coffee? He nodded, stepping closer as I poured him a mug. When he took it, his fingers brushed against mine, a small gesture that still sent a spark through me. We sat together at the small kitchen table, the silence between us companionable. I studied him out of the corner of my eye, marveling at how easily he seemed to fit into my world. Last night, he began, breaking the quiet, It wasn't just a moment. At least, not for me. I looked at him, my heart skipping a beat. It wasn't for me either, I admitted. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. Then let's see where this takes us, he said, his tone steady, as if he had already made up his mind. Tears welled up in my eyes, but this time I didn't hold them back. For years, I had told myself that my time for love and connection was over, that my quiet life was all there would ever be. And yet, here he was, proof that it wasn't too late, that I wasn't too late. I squeezed his hand, my voice soft but sure. I'd like that. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of conversation and quiet moments shared over coffee and toast. When it came time for him to leave, he kissed me goodbye at the door, promising to call later. As I watched him walk away, a sense of calm settled over me. Whatever lay ahead, whether this was the beginning of something lasting or just a fleeting chapter in my life, I felt ready to embrace it. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking back at what I'd lost or forward to what I feared. I was simply here in this moment, and it was enough. The weeks that followed were a quiet revelation. We spent our time together in simple ways, walking through the park, visiting cafes, cooking meals, and sharing stories of our pasts. It wasn't always perfect. There were moments of uncertainty, moments when I wondered if I was too old, too out of touch with the rhythms of youth to truly understand what he saw in me. But every time I looked into his eyes, every time he smiled at me, I felt reassured that our connection wasn't just some fleeting fantasy. It wasn't without challenges, of course. There were whispers. There were looks from strangers, sideways glances when we walked hand in hand. And there were moments when I felt the weight of our age difference pressing against me, trying to convince me that I was being foolish, that love was meant for younger hearts. But those thoughts never lasted long. Because each time I looked at him, I remembered how alive I felt, how he had awakened parts of me I had forgotten existed. We weren't perfect. No relationship is. But we were real, and that was enough. As I sit here now, writing this, I realize how much I've changed. I am not the woman I was before him. I am stronger, braver, and more willing to trust my heart. It's as if I've been given a second chance at something I thought was long past. Love, I've come to understand, isn't bound by time or age. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It catches you by surprise when you least expect it. And as for him, he's still here, still by my side. And in his arms, I've found more than I ever thought I could. I've found myself again. And perhaps that's the greatest gift of all. Love doesn't care about age. It doesn't care about expectations or rules. It simply is. And if you're lucky enough to find it, no matter when, it will teach you how to live again, how to love again, how to embrace life with the courage to follow your heart, even when the world tells you it's too late. For me, it wasn't too late, and I know now that it never will be.